So today I'm talking to Steve Peach. Hello, Steve. Again.
Hello, Victor. How are you?
I'm good, thank you very much. And how are you?
Top of the tree, thanks very much.
Right. Okay. Now you've been on before, and you spoke a lot about your architectural work and all the rest of it. For the ones who haven't heard you before, what do you do?
Well, I think I mentioned before that I'm an architectural designer by trade, but I like to consider myself a bit more of an artist of life. That was a kind of like a label that I gave myself last time we spoke, and I still sort of adhere to that because I don't like to be labelled by just doing one thing or one profession or whatever, because I think from experience, and life itself is kaleidoscopic, I think my skill sets at various levels are kaleidoscopic as well. So as well as some people can say, oh, I'm a postman, I'm this. I don't like to sort of give it a label as such. And again, I'm an explorer of many things, be they music, be they art, be they photography, or people at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So in a very enclosing nutshell, that's how I describe myself, more of an artist of life rather than just architect or architectural designer or construction worker or whatever you want to call it.
Here's a question on that. Do you think that is something that comes with age and experience?
Yes, absolutely. Because I think I've got to the age now where I'm 64 this year, and I'd wish I'd known, or I'd had the kind of like confidence or the foresight or the I've got more of a willingness to learn even at this age than I had when I kind of like felt that I was going through a process. You go through the process of school, you go through the process of getting qualifications, and then, I mean, just an aside, I always wanted to be arty. I always had like artistic persuasions, and Jean Langley, I still remember her name. Miss Jean Langley was my teacher at junior school, and she really encouraged me to do art. And I remember I did my first oil painting when I was 10, and I'll always thank her because she really, really kind of like pushed it. And I kind of like went down that avenue, did all the kind of like the O levels, and all that to get my qualifications. And my dad was a design engineer, and he always said to me, "You'll never make money as an artist." But he was a frustrated architect, although he was an engineer, and my path was really suggested by him at that age. And being relatively, inexperienced and young and not seeing an awful lot of the world as such, or as much as I wanted to see at that time, I kind of like went along that road. And when I was at Portsmouth Poly, as it was then at the School of Architecture, I was always in this sort of like continual battle with the tutors saying, oh, maybe you should think about doing art and all this kind of stuff. But I'm quite stubborn. And when somebody tells me not to do something, I keep persistingly do it. So I kind of like have gone through like a career now being self-employed as what I'm doing now for 30 odd years. And yes, it's made me a living, and there's been a certain notoriety with certain projects that have been on TV and stuff like that. But I've always had this kind of like inkling to being an artist. And I think there's something in your book which I picked out, and the only way to find yourself as an artist is to be one. Yeah. So, and that's it. You've just got to try it.
Yes.
And although I'm not in a position where I can retire yet, but through certain circumstances, I've kind of like developed or kind of engaged more in art activities over the last, certainly this year, through influences of circumstance, but also my daughter, because architecture can be quite a stressful sort of like occupation, because you're basically pandering to everybody's whim. You're not designing for yourself, you're designing for somebody else's approval all the time. Yeah, and it got to a point where I was getting pretty tied up in knots. My daughter, Ella, said to me, Dad, promise me you'll do a drawing a day. Just start off doing like a drawing a day. And circumstances at home were such that Jo, my partner, she was making some blinds, so she took over the living room space. So in the evening, there was nowhere to sort of like sit other than at the kitchen table. I didn't want to be sat in my office where I am now again in the evening. So I literally did that. I kind of explored kind of like drawing and fruit, drawing still life fruit and stuff like that. And through sort of, you know, posting a few bits on Instagram and stuff like that, there was kind of like quite a welcome response to everything. And at the same time, I was reading the letters that Vincent van Gogh sent to his brother Theo. And I got a brother as well, not called Theo, called Chris, and we kind of like exchange stuff quite in a sort of similar way, not in letters, but like verbally quite a lot. And so I always loved the sort of dynamics and the descriptions that Van Gogh did in his letters. And I got a series of books on him, and one of my favourite paintings of his is just a picture of an iris, a blue iris. And again, something else which I'll pick up in your book. And this is not a plug for your book, by the way, but it's...
Oh, no, you can keep
There's a lot of stuff that kind of like manifests itself when you start thinking about things. And I'd read avidly these books on Van Gogh and stuff, and I'd seen his stuff at the Tate and National Galleries. And there was just happened to be walking past a shop in Sevenoaks, and there was a picture which was very, very similar to this blue iris picture that Van Gogh had done, but it's by a local artist called Stephen Walker. And I thought, oh, that's quite similar to sort of like my kind of style. So looked inside, and he had some other pieces inside, and I thought, and looked at the price of them, and I thought, oh, not that I'm doing it for any work. And I thought, oh, but it was the fact it was this blue iris picture that kind of like hooked me in.
Yeah.
And just through kind of like introducing myself, and I said, look, you know, do you support like local artists? Because I gave myself an artist label, even though I'm not kind of like in any way RCA or anything like that registered. And they said, well, just send some of your sort of stuff in. And so I sent some pictures in to Laurence, who owns the shop, and it's like a French emporium in Sevenoaks. And she was really very welcoming and quite engaged with it. And she said, well, if you frame them, we'd be quite happy to sort of put them up for sale. Well, I had no idea how much, you know, to put value to this stuff that I was doing. Because I think it's very hard to do that. And anyway, I went with her expertise as such. And only, about 3 weeks ago, I got my first sale. And with that, I was kind of like overjoyed, the fact that someone had actually parted with their hard-earned cash to buy one of my etchings. And in some ways, I took a bit of a hilarious parallel, because Van Gogh himself only sold one painting in his lifetime. A very beautiful painting called the Wren Vineyard. And he got, I think it was like 400 francs for it at the time, which was equivalent to £16. And so I just thought I took joy in that, the fact that I kind of like, you know, comically drew allegiance to Van Gogh by the fact we'd only sold one painting ever in our lives. I would like to sell one for, I think it's 117 million that he sold one of his paintings for. But
yeah, it's certainly while he's still alive.
yeah, while he's still alive. Yeah. Well, even for the kids, whatever. But it's not done for the kind of like fiscal reward. It's just as a further creative outlet. As you know, I've been thoroughly actively involved in the blues camp things the 3 times that I went, and again, it's that sort of exploring creativity.
Yes.
Again, through getting to know yourself, I felt like I've come on leaps and bounds compared to where I was initially. All right, I still need to know my fretboard a little bit better, as we both know, but it's that kind of that enjoyment of creativity, like starting like we did at blues camp, and certainly mixing with all sort of age groups, like Henry that we had in our band. I mean, it's just that ability to talk to people about something that you've got in common, and whether it be music, whether it be art or photography. I just have found that it's a nice creative release compared to the more technical aspects and the client relationships that you have
Yeah.
in what I do as a job. It's kind of a lot freer, less contained as such, and I just feel now, being the doges that I am, ready to embrace it further in a more channeled sort of like direction.
Yeah.
But I'm a great believer in significance of things. And again, I'll just alert to these work that I've been doing that's been up for sale in this shop. Years ago, I worked on an old warehouse project, completely dilapidated, fallen apart. You literally, your foot would go through the floor. And all that was left of the previous occupant was these 2 chairs. One, it was like an old office chair covered in green velvet with horsehair in it. It was slapped it in this dust cloud emitted from it. And it was the only thing left. And I kind of like, as I do, attach sort of significance to these things, like the person who worked in this warehouse would have sat there for days, hours, years in that chair, and was left behind as a kind of like epitaph, if you like. And so I took the chair and I've recovered it, and I'm actually sat on it now. But what I also did was I took some photographs of this chair as this lonely, isolated, left piece of furniture in this dilapidated warehouse. And one of the pictures that Laurence picked up on was this green chair, and that has subsequently been framed and will go into the shop in the next week or so as well. So it's all these little significant things, kind of like I kind of like use as a creative catalyst.
Yeah. I think what's interesting is, well, there's several things that you've said. You know, obviously we're very similar in that sort of thing. If somebody tells us we can't possibly do something, that's the only reason you need to go ahead. You know, because you just think, well, why can't that work?
Why can't I do that?
Yeah, exactly. And the interesting thing, when I was saying that, do you think this is a thing that as you get older, you maybe because you disconnect, you become disillusioned with what you've been trained to believe.
Yes.
And then you realize, well, you're not going to be here forever, so you might as well go and do the things you want to do.
Yeah.
Another important aspect, I think. But also, I think one of the biggest problems for creativity is when it is linked to money. Because the problem with it is, if you create something that people just want, but you're not actually creating it because you're fulfilling a demand, but you're just doing the creative thing that you do, and because you're doing them, somebody buys it, that's not a problem.
No.
Right? But as soon as you start to do something that fits what you perceive as being your market, right, you start to not go with the sort of, if you like, the muse or whatever, however you want to call it, because you're always being dragged back to a sort of a logical reason why you should be doing something. And obviously, in the sort of the days when I used to do talks to other, rooms full of guitar players about making money, it was always this sort of thing of like, well, you've got this thing, you can do all of that, and there's a demand for that, blah, 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 blah. But you need this other bit that's your sort of creative wheelhouse
Yeah.
that doesn't require you to make money out of it, but it might advertise the fact that you exist for these other things. So it becomes your advertising budget that doesn't cost anything, just your time.
Yes.
Um, but I actually now I'm getting to, you know, I'm slightly ahead of you age-wise. I don't care about whether something makes money or whatever. You know, I've got a recording project that's on. And somebody was asking me the other day, so what are you going to do with it? And it's like, well, just create a load of CDs, and there will be some QR code that takes you to a website that takes you to all the material that's ever been done by all the members of the band, plus all the artwork, blah, 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 blah. So you need a physical item, right?
Yeah.
You need a physical item that is the work, the thing that connects your ideas into a, a, um, a physical thing in the world.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now that item can then take you off into lots of other non-physical things, you know, the internet, if you like. And it could take you off into bits of artwork, bits of poetry, and bits of this, and some writing. And it could be the thing that, you know, when I start work on this, well, I've already started, but, you know, the next book idea, that just starts appearing there as a,
yeah.
you know, a blog or a substack or whatever you want to call it, right? And the idea is that because it doesn't matter about the money, because I've learned this a long time ago that, and I think I told you about the single that I did with a band back in the blimey 1980s, early 80s, and it turned out, because of one thing or another, we could have given all the singles away and got our money back, because we ended up getting a recording on the BBC, which we paid for, and it covered the cost of the recording, almost to the pound. You know, one of those sort of things you go, well, that's a bit weird. A bit like the fact that the picture that drew you into that shop was like the Van Gogh that you were talking, right?
Yeah.
And I think what that's about is that unconsciously we know the terrain much better than we realise. We understand lots of possibilities, and that's what the creative process is about. It's about bringing things forward into a tangible state, but hovering around in your unconscious somehow, and maybe the collective unconscious if you go down the sort of Jungian thing.
It's almost like a story kind of like evolves, and like almost like I'm reciting a story to you of how we've got to that sort of position, and it's sort of then how you then, like I'm doing now, you kind of explain to somebody how this particular occurrence sort of came about, and you've got to be able to link all the various ingredients and associations with it to be able to almost like give sense to the final product as such.
Yes.
And again, for me, it's interesting then the relationships that you build up with people that you meet along the route of the story. For instance, did the pictures, and they were all unframed when I first took them to show the proprietor of the shop in Sevenoaks. And she said, "Oh, well, you need to obviously get them professionally framed." You know, I'd been to, I think, Habitat and bought some frames just to show initially what they were like. But she said, obviously, if you're going to, you know, expecting this sort of like money, then you need to do this, this, and this. So, dutifully, I found a local framer, a lovely lady, Patricia in Otford, that works out of a shed next to a railway line, and lovely, engaging person. And she turns out she used to work for a big publishing house in London, and she was complimentary with the pictures. We said, you're quite engaging because, you know, you don't just sort of sit there and talk about the weather. You know, you can sort of like go off piece if you like and start talking about stories, and you obviously get to know people, and they say how, you know, you're obviously not from around here, where you're from, and you interweave the stories, her story with my story. So on the back of that, and I've written some amusing little anecdotes now and again, and I've got like a journal. I've actually started putting them together, and she said, well, let me sort of proofread them for you, and I can send you, you know, stuff off to, you know, publishing people, and I've got contacts still and stuff like that. So again, it's another link to the creative sort of like,
exactly,
you know.
yeah.
And you don't do that if you're just sort of stuck working in a bank, possibly, or
No,
you know, or whatever. And
no.
it's sort of like nice being in the creative, or being of a creative affliction, if you want to call it that, because you're always looking for that kind of like element in creativity in most things, be it meeting somebody, be it a picture, be it a photograph, or just a walk in Knoll Park or whatever.
Yeah,
exactly. You know, and
exactly.
I think to have that creative bent, if you want to call it that, it's a lovely thing. And I think as I've got to the age I am now, I actually appreciate it more and I cherish it, those sort of like moments of creativity, because, you know, I'm divorced, my kids have grown up. And so, yes, I do need to make, you know, a certain amount of money to exist, but it's not the same. I ain't got a mortgage to pay for. I ain't got
No, exactly.
to pay for. And it's
Exactly.
that luxury of not having to run like a bloody hamster on the wheel all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
To be able to give you that little bit of freedom to do, you know.
So here's the thing about money linked to that entrapment thing, because I was talking to Minnie about, you know, the artists that obviously a lot of really successful artists and writers back in sort of the Edwardian period and stuff like that. They had enough money, right? They came from rich families.
Yeah.
But you got the odd one or two who didn't give a damn about money at all. I mean, and one of them, there's a guy called Osmond Spare, and is one of the great painters and artists of the Edwardian period.
Yeah.
But this guy lived in absolute squalor. Right?
Okay.
He didn't need to, because he didn't come from an extraordinarily well-to-do family. His father was a policeman, but he became so celebrated when he was younger because he was such an extraordinary draftsman. But he just rejected it all and then just lived in a sort of dilapidated warehouse in the Elephant and Castle.
Right. Okay.
But the point was, and I can get this thing about, you know, the freedom that you need in order to just create art. Well, you're not following the whims of other people. Although people wanted him to do portraiture and stuff like that because he was so utterly brilliant.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, you need to get a little bit of a balance from
Oh, yeah. Well, yes.
right? But I think it's that sort of thing of understanding that really you're not trying to fulfill anybody's expectations. And if you look at really good musicians and stuff like that, they don't care. You know, the Bob Dylans of this world don't care about who's buying their records or whatever. You know, it's just like they're just going to create a piece of music. That's it. That's what we do.
Yeah.
Right? But it's so difficult when you come out of, you know, come out of a society where it's all about making money. Now, going back to your dad.
Yeah.
Here's a question. How old was your dad when you were born?
He was 28.
Right, okay. So
22.
Okay, so my dad was much older than him, and my dad had been in the army, right? But the point was they'd all been, you know, through the rationing thing, right? They'd been through a period of time where things weren't good.
Yeah.
And to have a job.
Yeah.
That was it, right? And of course, you grew up in that, as I did, in that sort of period of time where all of that was beginning to fall apart, you know, in the 60s and 70s and all the rest of it. And it's like, yeah, you could go out there and do your thing. You could become a great photographer, even if you're not coming from a rich family, you know, the David Baileys and all the rest of it, right?
Yeah.
And then you had, obviously, with the art movement, you had all the sort of British artists and stuff, right? But there was, we hear about that, but of course, the mainstay of society was got to get yourself a job.
Yeah.
And that was the thing that was going on. And of course, we've still got that element, but in a way that it's become sort of slightly industrialized now. With the school, and your school must have been like this, really. As long as they sort of taught you stuff, they didn't give a damn about where you went, apart from the fact that if you went to a public school or a grammar school, they wanted you to go somewhere so they could go, hey, look, this is what we've managed to get with our alumni. I mean,
Yeah.
my school, they could, as long as you didn't die before you left, then they looked at as if that was a success.
Positive, yeah.
Yeah, because they were just not geared up for that. But the point was that you didn't have anybody giving you any aspirations artistically, although off the record you might have done. I certainly had a great art teacher.
Yeah.
But now, you see, as I say, it's become a little bit more industrialized because it's all about tables of results and stuff.
Yeah.
So, but also we've got this sort of slightly ridiculous thing about you could go to music college and become a musician, but not like a classical musician who goes off to an orchestra, of which, of course, there aren't that many now. Orchestras, I mean.
Yeah.
But it's become this sort of thing. What the colleges can make a lot of money because you go there. And you've now got a situation where you've got a load of people who are technically very good. This is an interesting point, but really haven't got hope in hell of making anything happen.
No, yeah.
And of course, it's not about the technique, is it?
It isn't. It really isn't. I mean, I've always been, again, slightly maverick in my approach to life. And as I say, I don't like being told that I can't do something and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
It's like my father, I just use my father as an example. He was a very precise man, fantastic draftsman. When he passed away, he was only 53 and I was only 26 when he died. But going to his office and seeing his colleagues, and they talk so highly, and I've still got some of his handwritten sort of drawings and his drawing instruments and stuff like that. He was, before the days of computer, you used to see the old technical engineering drawings that they used to, and these were bloody works of art. And
they were.
He was a very precise man. He sort of used to mow the lawn in a shirt and tie. He was that man. And again, talk about being the product of the war. My grandfather, he was off fighting in the desert against Rommel. He was in Italy and all that kind of stuff. Very dashing fellow. But my father was then brought up all those formative years by his mum, and he was the most polished, pristine, combed, clean boy in the world. So he was and he went to did his apprenticeship in engineering and then did that. And he was always very precise and never somebody that you could easily communicate with. He was always too a bit rigid and all that kind of stuff. And we kind of had conflict, and it wasn't an easy relationship. I had tremendous respect for him because he was just such a brilliant artist and all the rest of it. But it's kind of like I felt like I went down that avenue to get some sort of respect or from it, because if I could draw well in a precise way, he would react to that kind of stuff. I remember literally for end of the first year, and I didn't go back home very often. I remember I tipped up, having gone away as this sort of clean, sort of short-haired boy from Harrogate to Portsmouth. Came back, my hair was sort of down on my shoulders. I was wearing a a John McEnroe sweatband. I had a donkey jacket on. My zip was held together by bootlaces, and I had a pair of Converse sneakers on. My dad actually walked past me in the bus queue because he didn't recognise me, and it was that kind of. It then became a war of attrition because I'd sort of like, despite the fact I was arguing a lot with the tutors, I'd found this kind of like key had been unlocked to sort of like this creativity, and there was nothing more than I used to love where I used to stand up and kind of like present to your colleagues and the staff. It was almost like a theatre in a way.
Yeah.
And I kind of quite liked that element. And that's why, again, latterly doing the blues camp thing, and when I've had to stand up in front of planning committees, and you almost like feel like you're protecting your life, your livelihood against these total strangers.
Yeah.
And it's always almost like all my work has been sort of like for the affirmation of others, or and I've got to that point where I don't give a sod anymore whether anybody likes it. I will just do it because I feel I want to do it, and there's this sort of like fire inside me that needs to do it, rather than, oh, you should be now a member of the golf club and you should be driving around in a bloody this and that. You should be going on holiday 4 times a year, blah, blah, blah. And there's so much richness in creativity. I mean, when I say richness, I don't mean just financially, just the sheer joy of creating something. Yes, if somebody likes it, fantastic, but
no, I get that. And the interesting thing with this is that, because obviously I had a very similar problem with my father, because he was a sergeant major, Royal Horse Artillery and all the rest of it. And he'd had a terrible upbringing. I mean, it was just awful. So, I understand a lot more about him psychologically, but at the time he was just really impossible to deal with. And I was obviously equally impossible to deal with, I guess. And for me, he was a really good musician, my father.
Okay.
Completely by ear, though. So he could play piano, and probably he could more or less pick up anything and play it. Because
that was my dad. He could play by ear.
Yeah. But of course, to him, it was almost like the guitar was problematic because it was not. If I just play classical guitar, which I did, so that was all right. But all this other stuff was not all right because it was leading, it's like the gateway drug type of thing, But I think by the end of it, before he died, I think he sort of really recognised what it was that I was doing. So that was okay. But all up to that point, it was just not really very good. And you think, well, that's because they have aspirations for you and all the rest of it. But the problem is that you could so easily take on all of their problems and carry them, and they become your problems.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether this sort of came out in your own kids where you definitely didn't do what your dad did. Because
absolutely 100%, yeah.
Oh, absolutely, because I did the same thing. It was almost like, okay, you needed to have some sort of order in the house that people weren't killing one another and all the rest of it. But then you got to the sort of point, well, no, you have to sort of sort that out.
Yeah.
You sort that out. And I respect the fact that, you've tried, even if it was not successful type of thing. Stand on your own 2 feet, really. Partly because there was always that feeling with my relationship with my own father, which I don't think helps art, is what I'm saying. You don't want to cause too much of a hassle just because you need, the background static not to be too awesome, too awful. So a lot of stuff was done without saying what I was up to, really. And I think that's the thing that as you get, again, this is the thing as you get older, you realise that, you are right. And you could also understand where they were coming from and how they got there. And you just, because that there's all this other stuff that you've now been carrying for a long time.
Yeah.
That you can just go, don't need any of that now. Let's just do something. Let's create something out of, you send me a lot of recordings. I've been playing this. I've got this idea, or you post it up on the internet.
Yeah.
And it's like brilliant.
Yeah.
Because I see things in your playing that I sort of think, well, if you'd gone back, if you weren't the colour that you are, right, and it's
Yeah,
a 1930s recording of some guy from Mississippi playing that, you'd think
yeah, yeah,
that's pretty damn cool,
yeah.
right? So it's just that sort of thing of understanding that the essence of
Well,
what.
I'll say this to you now, Vic. Soul doesn't have a colour,
No, it does not. Exactly.
and I think you can get art, you get music, and if it's got a soul, it's just that thing. It doesn't matter. It isn't
Totally.
black, white, Chinese, whatever. It's just got that thing that makes it what it is. And
Exactly.
there's a certain thing where something's got soul and it resonates and connects people. And I think that is the great thing about a lot of music and a lot of art. You don't have to have all this kind of like, well, he's kind of like, from the Cameroon, or he's from Trinidad, or he's from China, or he's from Hong Kong, or southern states of America. It's sometimes things just have to be judged for what they are,
Yeah.
and how much they kind of like resonate with people. I mean, just quickly going back to the idea of the father thing, because the other thing about being old is you forget those bubbles in your head and they sort of pop and they disappear. Is even now, I think, because again, with my sort of technical drawing in inverted brackets, a lot of people have been very complimentary about my draftsmanship. And my dad never really saw any of that. And he never saw any of the buildings that I built, or anything that was, made its way to TV and stuff like that, or any civic design awards, which I've received a couple of. I don't shout a lot about what I've done because I don't think I need to, but because it's satisfying that it's been well received. But I would still now love to be able to just take him around some more stuff and explain it
Yeah.
to him, show it to him. Because
Yeah. I feel exactly the same.
it's acceptance by your main peer, who is
Yes.
your father at the end of the day.
Yes.
And I think that's something that sits with all fathers, sons, and daughters, to be honest.
Yes, absolutely right. Because again, there's so many things. My father never heard any of my recordings. He never saw me in concert. He never did, because he died by then, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And I'm not saying he would have liked the stuff. That's not the point. The point
no,
is you're doing something,
yeah,
right? And you're changing people's lives. That's the other thing, when you do stuff and you realize you're having an impact. And that's really what art's about, right? Isn't it? Art's about changing people's lives either by a picture that makes them feel in a particular way, or a poem that connects with somebody,
yeah,
or the very fact that you've written a poem that makes somebody else go, oh my God, I could do that.
yeah, yeah.
You know?
It's also the power that kind of like art. I'll say art. That's music, words, and all the rest of it. So somebody I would great admirer is Charles Bukowski. He was like a postman. He was a postman for 20 odd years, and then he kind of like just left his job one day and thought, right, I'm going to write be a poem. And he was a drunk and all the rest of it. But the creativity, the punchiness, and you can actually feel yourself winced by sort of the honesty of some of the things that, or honesty of that kind of like scenario of life in which he was in. And obviously
Yeah.
it changed as he become, again, more wealthy, more famous, more whatever, and that changed his lifestyle. But I think art can do that. Um,
Yes.
you know,
Yes. I think it does do that because you see, this is the thing, it's one of these things that it's off the balance sheet, right?
yeah,
So when you look at the way that, well, our parents did it, you can't do art because you won't make enough money. You won't get a job doing the thing. In other words, it's not on the balance sheet, right? In any shape or form, apart from obviously goodwill. But of course, people don't understand goodwill, right? But the point about this is that you realize that the balance sheet is not, it's like, this is what I'm saying about art is the great communicator. Going back to these talks I used to do with other guitarists and musicians about making a living, you have the thing that pays the bills and puts food on the table. but the other bit is getting people to know that you exist. And that is where art comes in abundance, right? So what it does is it's the unpaid advertising. It's the all of that stuff. You can gear that up in that way because it's the great communicator. It's the thing.
It is, but also it always, I think it's quite strange how artists, writers, whatever, are kind of like are looked upon by, should we say, the people who want to control other people's lives as being like slightly dangerous. We're
Oh
corruptors.
God, yes.
We're corruptors of society. I mean, you only look at the way that the fascists burnt up books and art and all that kind of stuff during the war and stuff. Yet they were still nicking bloody stuff and hiding them away because of the value of it. But it is that double standards really got me. But this is the sort of like the danger that art has to some levels of society. They're these artistic people. We can't trust them. They're dangerous. They can incite riots and all this kind of like stuff.
Yeah. Well, they're dreamers, aren't they?
Yeah.
We can't have dreamers, right?
You can't have dreams. No, you can't. You can't.
No.
But something as well is this commercial sort of side of stuff, which interests me as well. And I know you know of William Burroughs, the American writer. There was something that I picked out, and he basically says, "What does the money machine eat? It eats youth, spontaneity, life, beauty, and above all, it eats creativity. It eats quality and shits quantity."
Yeah.
And that's what I kind of like when you get into that. Oh, I'm making money. I'm going to make money. The kind of quality of your work sort of disappears as such.
Exactly.
I mean, some people like Damien Hirst, for instance, who is obviously well received and a very wealthy man. But you look at what he produces, and people pay stupid amounts of money for it. And it's like, and again, this is a very hard thing because art is very hard to classify as what is good and what is bad. And you look at the diversity of people like Rothko against Picasso, against Bacon, and all this kind of stuff. It's very hard to categorize art because it crosses over, a bit like music crosses over. And it's that kind of ability of anything creative to cross over and make bridges and connections with all sorts of stuff, which fascinates me. It really does.
Yeah. It's interesting you're talking about that. Because obviously I'm working on some new recordings, and what I'm doing at the moment is I'm going over to France next week to do some stuff with Chris, putting vocals and keyboards down and stuff like that. And what I do with the tracks is I listen to the songs and then hear in my head what I can, what vocalist I'd imagine singing over that, or what it reminds me of, or whatever. And there was an interesting track, which is like a sort of reggae number that I wrote about a friend of mine, and the band that we were in was actually quite a successful band at the time. I didn't realise. I mean, we had loads of airplay and across Europe and all that. And people used to say to us, because we were like a sort of you would have called it a white reggae band back in the day, right? You wouldn't use that term anymore. But people used to go, you sound like the Clash, right? So I listened to the Clash stuff because, to be honest, I didn't listen to a lot of that type of material of the Clash because I was listening to the reggae.
Yeah.
Right? I was listening to black reggae bands. I was trying to get to the roots of what it was that was going on. And then we would spin an idea that you would find in rock music into a reggae sort of thing, right? So I listened to the sort of Clash stuff, and I really sort of got that how the material worked, because it was being played by them, but being produced by a reggae producer.
Okay.
So you got this. He managed to sort of get what it was that they were doing, but making it sound authentic.
Mm.
I think that's fair enough to say that, because there's certain elements of it that sounded, and it was sort of punk, but it was also reggae, and a lot of it was that sort of balance about what the drums and bass were doing, or where the guitar was sitting, but in not just in volume, but in texture, right? But what I thought was interesting was I could really hear what people meant about this comparison. Um, and the Clash stuff didn't sound anywhere near as refined as what we were doing.
Okay. Yeah.
And in a way, a lot of it sounded sort of untidy. And but that was part of the charm.
Bit raw.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, our stuff was quite raw, but their stuff was rawer, actually, from what I can sort of remember. But the interesting thing was we weren't actually being influenced by them at all.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, but that's the thing. You can join the dots with music.
Yeah.
Because a lot of this is sometimes under the surface, your influences and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And it's a bit like kind of art. And I'm not saying for 1 minute I draw exactly the same as one artist or the other, but you can sort of see. I can hear what you're sort of saying. You've not sort of sat down and copied a Van Gogh. You've not copied a Degas or a Seurat or whatever.
No.
But it's there because you as you kind of like go through life, you're a receiver. You pick up things and you're not necessarily conscious of them, but you sort of see them, and then all of a sudden this thing appears in front of you that's come from sort of like nowhere, and it's full of influences that are within you, but you weren't really aware of until it sort of manifests itself in a piece of work, be it poetry, music, or art.
Yeah. So that's exactly right. And I think the thing is sometimes I won't say it's not good to be unaware, because I think it's sometimes best to be sort of slightly naive about things as that, and sometimes you can then jump on that sort of thing of a vibe that you spot, like this song sounds a little bit like an old Elvis Presley number, right? So you go back to an old Elvis Presley number and sort of go, oh, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that regarding the guitar sound or how the vocal is recorded.
Yeah.
So you might then go and record the vocal more like a sort of Elvis chest recording, where there's a bit more echo than you normally expect, type of thing, and then see what that does. See if that makes that sit in the way that piece of art is coming out, and again, you're not doing it because you're trying to make it sell.
No, and to be honest, that's the furthest thing. I don't think anybody sort of like with a brush don't think, oh, that's £10 worth, or that's added. You can't do that. You just can't do it.
No, if you do that, then I think there's a problem. Unless you do that from a point of view of it being a bit of a piss take of.
I think what's interesting is like people that work, say, in the stock market, for instance, they're all interested in figures and all that kind of stuff. But the figures they're talking about don't actually exist in reality. No. It's not real. It's not real.
None of this is real. You see, this is the thing I think that people find really difficult about value, right?
Yes.
And I used to do this a lot with the kids in school. Because I was talking about music and why something is, what makes something good or whatever. People would talk about stuff, Kids would come in and they'd blab off about something like that. And I said, look, just imagine that guitar. It'd be an old guitar sitting in the corner, right? An old school guitar. I said, how much do you reckon that's worth? Oh, £10. I go, okay, all right. Now, if I said to you that guitar had been played by, I'd pull a name out there, Sting or something like that, back in the day, been played by Sting, what's it worth now? And they go, oh, £200, right? And I go, yes, but it's even better than that, because inside there is Sting's signature. And then suddenly it just went, this crappy old guitar was now worth £3,000, right?
Yeah. Well, take on board like somebody like Peter Green and Gary Moore on a Peter Green thing. And he got it he bought it off him for nothing, but it was worth millions when he actually sold it, and he always wanted to buy it back. But it's like somebody will sort of see that, oh, it's just a guitar, it's by Pete Green's guitar, but it's got Pete Green's sweat in it. It's like Rory Gallagher's guitar. I mean, he was beaten to shit, but it sounded mean and moody and bluesy. And he had a certain sort of like level of salt in his perspiration that rotted paint. See, his own sweat rotted the paint. And this, anybody would see that in a junk shop and didn't know anything about it would think, 30 quid, whatever. But that's it. It's this value we put on things.
It's all in your head.
Path. Yeah.
It's all in your head. And that's true of anything. Because if it costs you 20 quid to build something and nobody wants it, you're not going to get 20 quid for it, right?
No, exactly.
Okay. So that's the thing about, you've got to have a demand for something that you can produce cheaply enough so that somebody will spend much more money than it costs you to think. But really, it's got nothing to do with the value of the thing itself.
Yeah.
It's the value that's attached to something. And it's really difficult for people to get their heads around it.
Yeah.
Because they think that something's got an intrinsic value, which is like...
And again, it's this sort of like notoriety through people's lifestyle and stuff like that. I'll use Vincent van Gogh again. The story behind him and the fact that he sold his first painting for 16 quid. But after he's died, and just true story of him and his complexity and his beauty and all that come out, all of a sudden that painting that was worth 16 quid is now worth $170 million. What's that? Yeah. 86.5 million quid. It's like Paul Blaster could have done with that money during his lifetime as such.
Exactly.
Even if it was for mental health care. But and again, it's the story associated with the personality, I think, which adds an intrinsic value to it. And it's about this story.
Good. So I think that, because just to sort of wrap up on this, and this is why I was interested about, because you started selling artwork, and this is when we spoke before, I was interested in the way that you did architecture and how you lived that sort of slightly, as you say, a maverick sort of way of dealing with that world that can be quite buttoned up, to be honest.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, because obviously I know other architects and stuff, right? But of course, again, it's like music, isn't it? You could be the great creative maverick art musician, but you could just be second fiddle in the orchestra.
Yeah.
Awesome musician, but doesn't do anything other than,
That's what he's supposed to do.
Yeah, the job that, it's a bit like being a plumber.
Yeah. You fit the job description, the job's yours.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely right. And, creativity, the more I do this, the more I realize it is the thing that we've got to really push out there with people. That it's about creativity.
It's interesting whether that creativity is encouraged as it should be, or whether or not creativity isn't given the kudos that it should have. I mean, again, I'll use Henry Price that we did at Bandcamp. That guy's such a talent, but you wouldn't think so when you sort of like first meet him. But it's not until kind of like relax. It's like anything, you relax into it, and you just sort of like you're gobsmacked by the sheer skill and talent and whatever that he could do. Yet and it's like, I wasn't expecting that. And again, I use Hendrix, for instance, as an example. He was a backing guitarist in a band for a long time. But at what point did that creativity become released for everybody to know what Hendrix actually was, and still is? That kind of like stratospheric genius on a guitar. And it's like, at what point does that is that creativity allowed to be released, or at what point does it become more appealing? Because he's still the same guy that played in the backing group, and it's that like what unlocks it and what makes that success become more apparent to everybody. Yeah, and it scared the shit out of Eric Clapton when he first saw him. You know, and that's what I love about it. Creativity can be released with unexpected results a lot of the time.
Yes.
Yes,
it does.
By the quietest of people a lot of the time.
Yes.
You know,
often.
Yeah.
All right then, mate. I think that's
covered a lot of ground.
pretty much an hour.
Okay, cool.
And it's always lovely to talk to you. Yeah, so best of luck with all the stuff that you're doing.
Yeah.
And
I've been told by my darling partner that I should conform more. But I should. Nah.
Oh, okay.
Nah.
No. No. Well, that's the thing that you can't do, and the same with me. I'm just not going down, and I don't have to go down that route. So
no. Nobody has to. There are other people out there that say you've got to have rules, you've got to conform, or you'll have anarchy. But
yeah, but there's an interesting thing about that, and we'll have to go down. We'll have to visit this at some point in the future, but we can't do it now. But I mean, a lot of people think of anarchy as being like there are absolutely no rules at all, but that's not quite how anarchy works.
No, it isn't.
And that's not the thing. But we won't. We will do at some point.
All right, mate. Okay,
it's another story. All right then, mate. So don't disappear. We'll finish the podcast now, and I'll chat to you.
All right.
Before we go. All right, mate.
Cheers.
Chat.
Take care.